And good evening. We are doing it live right here in the 5 o'clock hour in Los Angeles. Mottek On Money, 5 nights a week for you, live on the air here in 790 KABC, streaming live online worldwide at KABC.com, and the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast at KABC.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Well, stocks ending sharply higher today, and tech names leading the way. We shook off the weakness seen in the previous session after a poor Treasury bond auction, and new signs that interest rates might stay higher for longer. Tech names driving the bounce back today, with the NASDAQ leading the major averages higher. The NASDAQ up nearly 300 points today. The S&P 500 up 68, and the Dow managed a closing gain of 400 points. We did see Microsoft rally today up 2.5%, with the Dow component scoring its third record close in 4 sessions. And Intel, a tech bellwether, moving up nearly 3% to lead the gainers among the Dow. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ ended the longest winning streak since November of 2021 yesterday, after that bond auction went sideways yesterday. Also, we got the comments from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, which had spooked the market, who told the International Monetary Fund that the central bank was wary of head fakes from inflation and that the 2% Fed inflation goal was not assured. Now, we did hear from the San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly today. She said she wasn't sure the Fed had raised interest rates high enough to bring inflation back down to the 2% target. She told CNBC that, and when asked if rates were sufficiently restricted to bring inflation down, she said, "I don't know yet, and I think that's okay." While markets are demanding certainty from the Fed, the truth is we don't know. That according to the Fed president in San Francisco. Big news after the closing bell today. Moody's Investor Service cut its outlook on the U.S. sovereign credit rating to negative from stable, citing higher interest rates and doubts about the government's ability to affect fiscal policies. A negative outlook means that a rating may be cut in the future, but does not mean that it will be. Moody's continues to rate U.S. sovereign debt at AAA, the only one of 3 major credit rating agencies to maintain a AAA credit rating on the world's largest economy. We're following, of course, developments in the Middle East, and we'll discuss what's happening in the Middle East as well as here in Los Angeles with Middle East expert Lisa DAFTARI later this hour, the editor of the Foreign Desk. Hollywood breathing a big sigh of relief now that the Actors Union and the studios have made a deal to end the nearly 4-month actors' strike. Details about the deal coming out today. I'll talk about that big news tonight with entertainment law attorney Jonathan Handel. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, the big news after the closing bell, and the whole works this evening. Joining us live now, investment expert Brian Perry, chief investment strategist and portfolio manager at Mint Asset Management at mintassetmanagement.com, and the author of the 25% Cash Machine. Quite a week here, Brian, and we ended on an up note for the day and for the week. Give us your view of things here at the moment.
Thank you, Frank, and always good to be with you and your audience. Today was really a lot of performance pressure kicking in here. That's just a Wall Street term for I better get involved in this market before I close out the monthly statements with too much cash on the books while the major averages are moving higher here, even though they're based on a very narrow leadership pack of big fat tech names they make up a good portion of the weightings of the major averages. So you had the 2 major AI stocks here, namely Microsoft and NVIDIA, making their ways. NVIDIA almost back to its old highs. Microsoft, punching out new all-time highs, and that's just, those 2 stocks carry a lot of weight, a lot of momentum, a lot of enthusiasm that carries along with the rest of the semiconductors and the software names. The downgrade after the close here, with Moody's bringing a negative implication to the debt rating here, is the first time they've ever really cited political polarization, Frank, in any of their notes. It's always been, something fiscal or monetary, or related to, Katrina or a war or something like that. But this is the first time that they really, found it to be, clashing on Capitol Hill now is a problem. And that's interesting because they normally try to steer clear of that. So I find that to be interesting, and that does, we'll see how that weighs out come Monday. Certainly, the White House and Treasury came out immediately afterwards saying that was a bunch of hooey, and that they've got it wrong. But I think the Treasury pretty much has it right, and this will be a major election issue going into next year for those that are wanting the government to start running the budget more like a corporation or more like what we do at home. The the deterioration of debt affordability is really what it's all about, and it's the risk of losing tax revenue if the economy does slow down. We've seen today's UMich consumer sentiment number come in at 60.5 versus a 65 estimate, and that's a low number. That tells you that people may be starting to dial it back already. You've seen lower hiring by the major retailers going into the holiday season. So they're anticipating lower headcount coming through the stores. So if you have lower tax revenues, but your interest payments on your debt keep going up, and now we're clear at $34 trillion, then you run into what Moody's is targeting here is a widening of unaffordability, and so that needs to start to be resolved here. Which is something that is another talking point for another time. On the good side of things today, we saw Taiwan Semiconductor posted really strong October figures here, which really boosted the chip sector, especially for the chip equipment stocks, which showed very good relative strength today across the board. Applied Materials and Lam Research and KLA-Tencor and ASM Lafarge had really strong names here. Even Qualcomm had a really good move here today. And this is all kind of a slingshot move here coming off of what were mediocre numbers coming out of AMD and Qualcomm and some of the other names within the chip patch. So it's, TSM, the biggest foundry in the world, they kind of laid more of a nice glide path for the semis for the end of the year, fourth quarter. And that was from Wall Street Journal, so that's legit. NVIDIA ticking higher here in the last, after hours here too. Apparently they're coming out with on a report that they're working on a new line of AI chips that are customized for China specifically because of these new restrictions that the White House and Congress have laid out, so that we don't sell China our best and fastest, most robust technology. So NVIDIA is working their way to maintain a very big market that they don't want to jeopardize simply by only having the Ferrari chips, if you will, but willing to sell them something just a little bit under that. Another observation is over 50% of the S&P 500 stocks trade under their 200-day moving averages. So this is not a really broad-based rally here, and it's important that people just really pay attention to the fact that the narrowship is the leadership is narrow, and that we need to the sectors that are performing best, certainly technology, some industrials are acting good, and some consumer discretion, but again, like the Netflixes of the world, but again, it's a real stock pickers market here, aside from maybe the top 10 names in the tech, and certainly with this treasury market going kind of haywire, where the 30-year didn't go well. That at the same time, ICBC, the industrial Chinese largest bank, that was hit by a ransomware attack during that current treasury auction. So that helped the cybersecurity stocks like Palo Alto Networks, CrowdStrike, and Zscaler move higher. But that's also, you just always think that who's going to attack the Chinese banks? You usually think that ransomware in China, all the cyber attacks come from China. But there's a lot of really rogue and very sophisticated cyber hackers out there in the world that can even get inside the biggest banks.
Thank you for that comprehensive analysis of this big week here on the air live with investment expert Brian Perry. And then after that happened, then you got the Moody's Investor Service cutting its outlook on the U.S. sovereign credit rating to negative from stable. What do we need to know about this? A lot has been made of this poorly received $24 billion sale of 30-year Treasury bonds. We don't often heavily focus on this, but you're right. It was unclear whether the Treasury auction had been affected by a reported ransomware attack against the U.S. unit of the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China that apparently disrupted the U.S. Treasury market. Can you explain for us what happened there and what do we know at this point?
Well, this happened on their financial services side of the bank. Okay, so they're in the midst of trying to conduct what they call the repos. These are repurchase agreements. Your daily functions of what these are the flows. Your overnight flows. And while they're trying to take down, bonds, from the auction here, it's very disruptive because it basically they have to shut the system down and halt the process from their standpoint. The auction still goes on, but the primary dealers on Wall Street were left holding 25% of the auction. There were $26 billion worth of 30-year bonds being auctioned off, and when you think about the fact that 25% of it couldn't find buyers from around the world, because you have to say to yourself, you better pay me some. I want a pretty fat return if I'm going to invest in the U.S. for 30 years.
Half redneck, half posh. 100% fun. Trey Crowder and Corey Ryan Forrester try and learn fancy culture in Putting On Airs.
The host of the Medium Popcorn Podcast, Brandon Collins and Justin Brown.
Okay, so Paddington 2 had like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes for years.
You guys ruined that?
Justin came in and took it down 2 points because of his rating. That's the time we started getting death threats.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. People worship that movie.
Putting On Airs. The podcast is on YouTube and wherever you listen.
Better than 4.5%. And so there's a rebellious nature going on here about buying long-term dated U.S. paper, and and so when the primary dealers have to buy that back, and they have to, they're obligated to, in order to keep the auction liquid. Rick Santelli came out on CNBC and said, I gave that rating a D-, and the only reason why it wasn't an F was because it didn't fail. So that's a wake-up call. And even though the shorter-term stuff is moving, the 2s and 5s and 7s year paper, which is in the belly of the curve, the longer-term stuff, 10-year and 20s and 30s are being called into question here. And these are pressure points for people to understand that not everything that the Treasury and the yields are up because the economy is doing so well. Well, if that's so great, then you would see demand for that paper, because it would mean that people have a lot of tremendous trust in not only the ability to pay back that debt, but also the fact that inflation is not going to rear itself back up.
All right, and of course we focus heavily on the yield on the 10-year note, which impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates. That has come down from the recent high above 5%, now at 4.64%. Where do you see that go from here, and where do you see you think the Fed is done raising interest rates on the short-term side?
I do. I think the Fed is very much done on the short-term side. I think what they're saying now, anything beyond that is pretty much rhetoric. On the 10-year, though, Frank, we could see the 10-year revisit 5, mainly on the execution of these Treasury auctions here, and that may be where people get a chance to again lock in some of these shorter-term rates on corporate bonds, on CDs, and things of that nature. I think it's going to be one more visit to that level between now and the end of the year. But I think that what we saw with the recent jobs numbers, which were softer here, the lower wage growth numbers, and what the consumer sentiment numbers here, that we're going to start to see some more jobs slowing here in the first quarter, which will probably start to work into the bond market on the short term, and start to it may pull the Fed forward and actually have them start to lower rates here before May, June, which is what people are thinking about. It may be spring when they start cutting rates here from Fed funds.
On there live with investment expert Brian Perry, and you noted it, the consumer confidence reading, which of course is very important, down in the month of November for the fourth month in a row due to worries about higher interest rates as well as the war in the Middle East. The weakest reading we've seen since May. That's certainly significant heading into the holiday shopping season. At this point, Brian Perry, where are you putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Well, you've got today I was just selling a lot of covered calls on a lot of stocks in the portfolios I manage here, because things are really extended here short term for all the really great momentum names here in the big cap tech. But for putting money to work here next week, people can look at FLR, which is a large engineering company that's doing extremely well here with all the infrastructure bill. They're bringing in a ton of business. The weight loss drugs are really going to be a big boon here for Novo Nordisk, NVO. Berkshire Hathaway still trading well off its highs. You can look at BRKB here as a way to buy into the market at these levels here. And certainly I started buying some ExxonMobil down here. It's come way down here with oil. There was a $26 million insider purchase here this last week at 105. Stock trades at 103 and change, so you can be a little bit smarter than that person. Then I like also International Seaways, INSW, which is a large transport company for oil and petroleum products around the world here, because of what's happened in the Middle East and China. The routes are longer, the day rates are higher, and the shipping stocks are bringing in. They're just printing money right now. So I like that one as well. Also, look at the dollar's made a big run here. This thing with Moody's is, I think the dollar's, it cracked here, and I think you can short the dollar by buying UDN, Uncle David and Nancy, is the symbol there, and then go long the Swiss franc, which is way down. That was trading around 104. It's currently trading around 98. That symbol there is Foxtrot, X-ray Foxtrot, FXF, and so that's a good pair trade for people that just say want to short the dollar, go long the Swiss franc. The Swiss have no debt, and it's the safest currency in the world. And I'm shorting eBay here, and also the regional banks KRE, and also the Chinese large cap, the FXI. I think those are all ready to roll over.
All right, we see oil back to around 77 and change here, down 4.2% for the week, Brian. Given the upheaval in the Middle East and threats that Iran sees a broader conflict brewing here, what do you see ahead for oil?
Well, I think you got to start picking away at it here. This is usually where you saw Warren Buffett just up his stake this week here. I think in the last 2 days in Oxy Petroleum to 26% of the company. I've seen Chevron's latest report come out and said that fossil fuel is good to go for the next 40 years. There's just a big overriding narrative that fossil fuel is going away sometime soon, and it's not. So, especially with it's the lowest number of permits in the U.S. ever been issued during this administration here for new exploration. And so with that being said, I think buying the multinationals, I think, is a good place to go because you get, the upstream, the downstream, and the midstream operations here where you're exploring for oil, you're processing it, and you're selling it retail and jet fuels and lubricants and diesel and gas. And I think that's going to get good dividends in there. So, Oxy and Exxon look like a place to be here. And then certainly for those that want to go outside the world and outside the U.S. and look at Petrobras, PBR. It's been a great stock all year long. They have a $9 per barrel extraction rate, which is cheap, one of the cheapest in the world, and it pays almost an 18% dividend yield. I really like that. Very
interesting. And here we are, Microsoft at a record high here today, almost 370 now?
Sure is. And, they can do no wrong. They are hitting on all cylinders here, and it just seems as if, momentum begets momentum here. They really kind of broke out at 365. So 380 looks like the next stop for Mr. Softy before, and that could take the market up another, 2-3% just on its own leadership.
Well, I can imagine if Steve Ballmer got on stage tonight, he would go absolutely bananas, I'm sure, on that big news. And what about Apple here, up today, up more than $4 at around 186? What do you see ahead for Apple here?
I'm a little perplexed on this one, Frank, because Apple's numbers were fairly ho-hum. I imagine that the channel checks are doing pretty well here for iPhone 15 is what I can imagine. But people are still excited about their services revenue. That was up in double digits here last quarter here. So as long as they keep growing that part of the business, on the phone side, it's more of a utility, but on the services side, that's exciting, long-term revenue stream. And it continues to defy the odds. When you think the stock is down for the count, it just starts to levitate. And that's what we've seen here this week. Next stop looks like 190, 195.
All right, of course, the big news here in Hollywood, the actor strike is over. We see Netflix getting a boost today, up more than $12 at $4.47. The streamer moving higher. What about the media names now that the strikes are over?
Well, Netflix is, I think, the best in class right now. I think Disney still has a lot of issues to work out here with their expenses and all. Their cost-cutting program is something to be noted, but the rest of the company here has a lot of challenges ahead of it here. Their ad revenue is going to be challenged here going into the next year. So Netflix has broke out here, and then you look at what is it? Warner Brothers is WBD. They just struck a deal here with Verizon to bundle their services with Netflix. So Verizon is going to offer a bundled Warner Brothers Max with Netflix for $10 a month, which is a far cry cheaper than $17 for the both of them in a combo package. And Verizon actually looks pretty good here too. They had their free cash flow numbers were excellent, and they're going to be up over $1 billion over the next year from 17 to 18 billion. And the stock pays a 7.5% yield here. If that pulls back maybe a buck or two because it ran up from 31 to 36, you can grab an 8% yield, and that's money good.
Terrific, Brian. Well, thank you very much for that thorough update here tonight, wrapping up a big week. That is investment expert Brian Perry, Chief Investment Strategist and Portfolio Manager at Mint Asset Management at mintassetmanagement.com. He's also the author of the 25% Cash Machine. Brian, have a great weekend. Thank you very much for taking the call here this evening.
Always good, Frank. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Brian Perry. And coming up, we'll check where the action was on Wall Street today, heading into the Veterans Day holiday weekend. We salute all veterans. We salute your service and sacrifice. People like you and me have our ear to the ground in all things business. We like to be informed and well prepared. And as important as finance is, I want you to have a plan in case you're hit by someone not paying attention to the road. Thinking ahead serves us well. And even still, we can get caught off guard as people are so focused on their destinations that they might not have a plan if they're in an accident that's not their fault. That's why I encourage you to put my friend, attorney Clark Fielding's number in your phone right now under the word accident. The number is 833-88-SHARK. So if you're in an accident, you'll be ready to win with your strategy to make Clark Fielding your very first call. Fielding Law aims for the highest possible settlements, considering you might need long-term care, rehab, compensation for lost wages, and any ongoing physical or emotional pain. So if you're hurt in any kind of accident, call for a free consultation with Fielding Law. You can trust them. They're honest, respected, and your strategy in case you get into that unexpected accident. Motorcycle, truck, pedestrian, scooter, hit and run, boating, or bicycle accidents, you name it, call 833-88-SHARK. That's 833-88-SHARK. Or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Following the latest developments in the Middle East, Iran's foreign minister reportedly telling his Qatari counterpart that the expansion of the Israel-Hamas war is inevitable. Iran and its terror proxies in Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq have been threatening a regional conflict since the start of the war, sparked by Hamas's terror attack on October 7th on southern Israel. It killed some 1,400 people, most of them civilians, and saw some 240 people taken hostage in Gaza. Fierce fighting continues, with the IDF reportedly killing 150 terrorists in one of their strongholds today. Also, the Israeli Defense Forces said 3 soldiers were seriously wounded after an anti-tank guided missile launched from Lebanon hit an army post near northern Israel. Meanwhile, locally, tensions are running high, with police responding to the Museum of Tolerance earlier this week as multiple fights broke out in conjunction with the screening of footage documenting the Hamas terror attack on Israel. Joining us live now is Lisa DAFTARI, Middle East expert and also the editor of The Foreign Desk, who's been following developments closely with us here. Lisa, thank you very much for taking the call. And what's the latest coming across your desk there this evening?
Yeah, I think you did a good job at giving the summary. You know, everyone's just waiting as this war rages on, and everyone's wondering how big will this get, and will the United States get involved? The question I get asked multiple times a day is, will this lead to World War III? You know, history books do a better job of explaining things many, many years from now. But in the meantime, we are wondering whether or not the United States will get involved or not. The Biden administration, meanwhile, is trying to separate its involvement in shooting down, I should say, threats in Syria and Iraq, where you have insurgencies from Iran's regime that are targeting U.S. assets for a very long time now. But 43 times just in the last month, we have had U.S. assets hit. And the Biden administration thinks this is, or wants to believe that this is separate because they don't want things to escalate, of course. Iran's regime pulling the puppet strings here knows that the United States does not want to get into another war. They do not have the resolve. They are very much trying to minimize the escalation. And in the meantime, they want to put pressure on the United States to back, or at least get the Israelis out of Gaza and to back off in terms of its retaliation efforts. So we're watching this as Iran's regime continues to provoke, and Israel fighting on three fronts, and it continues in the north from Lebanon. Lebanon not getting involved to the full extent.
For decades, Rolling Stone has set the bar for entertainment publications. Today, Rolling Stone Music Now takes over in podcast form.
We have Michael Azerrad, who was Nirvana's very first biographer. I'm not sure how many people realize how many of the best songs on In Utero were written way beforehand.
To be fair to Kurt, he was also a new father. There was a lot of stuff distracting him. It wasn't just drugs, although that was certainly a major factor.
Rolling Stone Music Now, wherever you listen.
That it could, and we're very happy about that because remember, Hezbollah in Lebanon, another terror proxy that is being funded by Iran's regime, is actually a much more trained, experienced, and well-endowed terror organization than Hamas is. So that would be a very difficult enemy to curb in terms of the different fronts in which Israel is fighting right now. But it looks like, I will say, let me end this with a bit of positivity. The fact that we have not seen escalations from Hezbollah means that terrorists only speak one language, and that is the language of military might and force, and that the IDF has been able to at least minimize this, at least in terms of the threats that are coming into Israeli territory.
And as you noted, the U.S. Did carry out an airstrike on what we're told is a weapons warehouse in eastern Syria used by Iranian-backed militias in retaliation for what's been described as a growing number of attacks on bases housing U.S. troops in the region for the past several weeks. So this, according to the Pentagon. Do we know anything more about these attacks on U.S. troops or anything else that's going on there?
No, we've seen also the Houthis in Yemen get involved as well. There have been at least a handful of episodes in which missiles have come from Yemen into Israel. Yet another insurgency, another proxy by Iran's regime. You know, I want to keep bringing the attention back to Iran's regime because, Frank, you mentioned the fights outside the Museum of Tolerance. And I think that for your listeners, this is a very important point. The war is here in the United States as well. And it might not be the war between Hamas and Israel, but it is the PR war or the narrative war, where it is taken to the streets of L.A. and New York and Montreal and other places. We're watching, Jewish children being beat up on college campuses. We're watching, people really conflate the narrative, influencers with millions of followers just posting from the river to the sea, not even understanding that that's a genocidal call for all Jews to be wiped off the earth. And I think that that's really what we will have to contend with once this war is over. And when I'm talking about the military part of this war is over, we will still have to go back to knowing that people are now saying the things that they used to say quietly out loud, and that is anti-Semitism all over the world. And to see, the film that was being shown inside the Museum of Tolerance, for heaven's sake, it's called the Museum of Tolerance, and outside to see, pro-Palestinian protesters beat up those who are coming to support the film, those who are trying to get into the museum. And I spoke to a few colleagues and friends who were inside the museum watching the film. Now, remember, the film was footage that Hamas actually took of their massacre. So horrific scenes of what they are very proud of because they're the ones who actually filmed it, very much like ISIS would do. And they could hear the protesters outside the museum, and they described it as chilling. That's the word that one of my colleagues used. So you can understand that people are on edge all over the world, and it's not just the conflict that is spilling out over the Middle East, but really has been brought here. Its ugly head has been seen all over the world, and we really have to do a better job at looking at the facts, looking at the history, and understanding that hatred and bigotry has no part in any of this.
And certainly the Museum of Tolerance in West Los Angeles has taken a leadership role in all this for years. It should be noted 85 years after Kristallnacht, the anti-Jewish riots that occurred in Nazi Germany. This happened. Holocaust survivors say what happened in southern Israel on October 7th and how they've seen the world respond since reminds them of what they experienced in their childhood back during the days of Nazi Germany.
Yeah, I can imagine. Imagine living through this twice. For many Holocaust survivors, that's exactly what it was. I can tell you as a student of history, I would listen and learn about the Holocaust, and I would always wonder why no one stepped up, how the world could stand by and allow something like the Holocaust to happen. And now as I watch what's happening on college campuses, when I watch the hatred, if you watch some of the protests out of New York City today, taking over cop cars, very reminiscent of the BLM protest as well. But we can't let this go on without consequence. We have to be the generation that does not allow something like the Holocaust to happen, whether it's just an ideology or, God forbid, worse than that. We've lost enough lives. But again, I want to bring back the narrative to really getting to the source of the problem, and that is to combat Iran's regime. Put pressure on your lawmakers to go after Iran's regime with our policies, with sanctions, however we can. They have to stop supporting terrorism. Terrorism is what they want us to live in fear, whether we are in Los Angeles or in Gaza or in Tel Aviv. That is exactly what the enemy wants, and that's what they're getting. And meanwhile, you have these kids on college campuses saying, from the river to the sea, free Palestine, all these empty slogans. They have no idea what it means. And, the mullahs in Tehran are laughing all the way. So we have to educate ourselves better on this topic and hopefully see an end to this bloodshed, this hatred, the bigotry, the fear, the terrorism, all of it.
Lisa, thank you very much for taking the call here tonight. We'll continue these conversations as we follow all these developments here with you. That is Middle East expert Lisa DAFTARI, editor of the Foreign Desk. She's also on Twitter. Foreign Desk News, right? Is on X, Twitter, right?
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, Lisa.
ForeignDeskNews.com, of course.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for joining us live here tonight on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KBC. Good evening. Hollywood breathing a sigh of relief now that the Actors Union and the studios have made a deal to end the nearly 4-month actors' strike. We did get some details today from the SAG-AFTRA president, Fran Drescher, formerly known as the Nanny, and National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator Duncan Crabtree Ireland. They held a big news conference, which was delayed, but ultimately did happen late this afternoon. Not all rainbows and ice cream cones in all of this. It's clear that not all members of SAG-AFTRA's national board were entirely happy with the deal. It was passed with 86% of support, according to the union leadership. That was lower than most folks expected. A summary of the contract is expected to be released on Monday ahead of voting, which starts on Tuesday. Joining us live now is entertainment and technology law attorney Jonathan Handel, who's been following this Hollywood drama. Jonathan, thank you very much for taking the call here to wrap up a big week on the labor front and the big news conference. Give us your reaction to this big news today and what we learned from the president of the union and the executive director today.
Frank, good to be with you, and happy Friday. I am one of the 2 or 3 stragglers remaining at the site at SAG-AFTRA headquarters where the press conference was held. It was a pretty boisterous affair at times. Now it's several people working on laptops. We learned some details. I've learned some from sources. We learned some of the press conference. Let's talk about that. AI is the headline here in the potentially impending battle between the bots and the actors. The actors are holding off the bots, at least for the time being. The union obtained informed consent requirements and compensation requirements that will protect members, are intended to protect members, and by members I mean both principal actors, in other words, the actors that you see talking on screen, and also background actors, what many people call extras. Both categories, all categories of actors are protected by certain compensation requirements, certain informed consent requirements, and we will see as the technology develops over the next several years how this plays out. And of course, these are 3-year contracts. The second big issue was additional residuals for shows on streaming. The union wanted a framework that it had devised that would involve a percentage of the revenue from the platform itself. How much money did Netflix make in the last 3 months? And, a percentage of that would be a pool that would be distributed among all the actors on all the shows on streaming. That's not what they got. But what they did get was better than what the Writers Guild got. Writers Guild got a bonus for successful shows, and success is defined very narrowly. The actors got a bonus that's twice as large, and of that bonus, 3/4 of it goes to the actors on the successful show. 1/4, which is estimated to be about $10 million a year, will go into a newly created fund to be jointly administered by the management and labor that will be distributed more widely. So share the wealth, spread the wealth around is the goal. And although $10 million is not a lot when you're distributing among a bunch of people, it is a beginning that I would certainly expect 3 years from now they'll build on in negotiations. Finally, of the big 3, basic wage increases. How much will basic wages increase in the first year of the contract? The union had wanted 15% because of the high inflation we had in the last several years. The companies had wanted to were offering 5%, which is what the directors and writers got. The union agreed to 7%, closer to the company position, but stronger and very significantly breaking the so-called pattern that the companies try to establish and then impose on union after union.
On the Air Live with entertainment and technology law attorney Jonathan Handel. And since AI was the big focus of discussion, to kind of bring it home, there was an interesting article, I believe the New York Post put it this way, that looks like Brad Pitt's smile and Jennifer Aniston's eyes will be protected against AI in this new deal. Isn't that indeed the case?
That is, if someone says you've got Jennifer Aniston's eyes, the answer will be, and she better have been paid for it and consented, because those are the requirements in what would otherwise be the potential for sort of Frankenstein reassembling of pieces bit by bit. Another interesting point that emerged from the press conference, or didn't emerge from the press conference, rather emerged from my talking with a source, is that that 86% vote that you mentioned, the 14% dissenters, those were not apparently dissenters on the major issues. They were people that thought that the deal was good, but that there was a subsidiary issue not related to AI residuals or initial compensation, where they thought, look, I just can't vote for it without X. And another person said, I can't vote for it without A or B or C. And so it wasn't a unified movement of people saying, look, the AI is not enough or the residual is not enough.
There was quite a bit of drama this afternoon. This news conference was delayed. What was going on there behind the scenes?
I'll bet they were trying to get a unanimous vote. That's my guess. And they ultimately, came out to us after, an hour and a half, I think, an hour and 20 minutes. It started late, and they had the 86% vote in their pockets.
So what's the next step? They're going to release the full details on Monday, we understand, and then a vote on Tuesday. And is it expected to pass by the rank and file?
It'll pass by the rank and file. Yeah, these things always do. And will it be in the 90s or will it be in the 80s? That's really the only question here. All it requires is 50%. So this is a done deal. The strike, as you know, was suspended as of Wednesday midnight, or technically Thursday 12:01 a.m. And the strike is over. We are told that perhaps as many as 24 television shows are resuming production within a few weeks, so that we get some new scripted content out by February.
All right, big week. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan Handel, for taking the call to wrap things up, and we'll probably revisit this again next week when the votes are taken and so forth. That is entertainment and technology law attorney Jonathan Handel, live with us here tonight on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC. We salute all veterans this Veterans Day holiday weekend. See a lot of retailers will be offering veterans special deals, so be sure to look for those. We salute the service and sacrifice of all of our great veterans, especially those who are listening to 790 KBC. Thank you for that. This is Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
Get an inside look at Hollywood with Michael Rosenbaum.
Let's get into the fascinating, wonderful Bonnie Wright.
Oh, yeah. Ralph Fiennes was the most chilling actor to work around.
He wasn't funny and making jokes.
No. A little bit, but in, Voldemort way.
Did you feel like he got very little direction? They let him do what he was doing?
I'm sure he was probably the type of actor that would go kind of quietly and speak to the director rather than
What am I doing wrong? What do you want me to do?
Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum, wherever you listen.